Welcome to the Vector Accelerator podcast, where we delve into the profound journey of veterans navigating the transition from military service to civilian life. Join us as we explore the challenges faced and the critical question for clarity in identity, purpose, and community beyond the uniform. I'm your co-host, Michael Halterman. My friends call me Halty, and I hope you will too. I spent about 20 years in the United States Marine Corps, first 10 years as an infantryman, and the second 10 years in special operations. The best version of me is always in service to others. I'm joined by my co-host, Joe Lara.
You know, I joined the Navy to serve 4 years thinking that was going to be it, but that quickly turned into 24 and it flew by. Today, the best version of me is serving and hustling for others so that they can find clarity. And Halty and I, we're here together, and we hope that you can find the best version of you.
Today, we have a special guest, Michael Davidson. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Halty. Nice to join.
Thank you so much for being here. You know, Michael did 2 decades in the United States Navy, going from deck sailor all the way to lieutenant commander. And in the last 9 years, he's spent that helping veterans transition. And so, as we always like to start with a little bit of group introspection, and it's going to go to Joe first. Michael, that'll give you a little bit of time to build your thoughts. But what about your past gives you strength?
Yeah, this question is good because when I first heard this question, my mind went to, you know, what fires me up, what gets me excited, so I can push through something, work, a difficult challenge or whatnot. But that's not really what the question is about. It's sort of looking back in my past and finding when I was in a state of flow, when I was doing things that I love to do, where you kind of lose track of time. And maybe in the last couple of years, I was working on this project to develop curriculum for students. And as I was putting all those pieces together, I was realizing, man, there's some creativity there. There's some intentionality with trying to like put together the right thing to know the audience. So thinking about the audience, others first. So I started thinking, okay, others first, creativity, all those things. Those are my strengths and my talents. And I mean, that's what comes to mind when I look back and I see where I found a state of flow, where I lost track of time. It's in those things. And yeah, that's just what came to mind.
Michael, what are your thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it just like I won Joe's life. It just sounds like he found like Nirvana. Yeah, like with me, like, you know, like what in my past gives me strength. Just because it's what sailors do. We tell sea stories. I'll just tell a quick sea story.
Yes.
And so I'll try to make this, you know, like not too lengthy, but here's how the story goes. I'm raised by my grandparents. My grandfather was in the Navy in World War II. And growing up, I was like the only child, but, you know, the only grandchild. And then he always called me Nub, Nubbins, Nubs, something with Nub. Fast forward, I enlist in the Navy, go to submarine school. I get to my first boat, and as I'm going down into the boat, the topside watch says, "Get hot, Nub," and I'm like terrified. I'm like, "What's happened here?" Has my grandfather called the boat and told them my nickname that only he calls me by. Well, come to find out, it's a freaking acronym for non-usable body.
Jeez.
So I get so pissed off when I find this out. I call my grandfather and I'm like, "Hey man, like, you've been calling me a non-usable body my entire life." And he's like, "Well, you kind of have been."
Grandparents.
I know. And while it may seem harsh, it gives me strength every day to be a usable body. And
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Man,
that's cool.
That's awesome. So I appreciate both of your perspectives on that. I a while back, about a year ago, maybe 2, I heard about the self-authoring program where you really go back through all of your history. and write through, like, what do you remember your earliest memories, and work your way all the way through the decades. And so I did the short version. I'll just leave it at that. I'll do the short version. But what I got from all of that was I've had the privilege of doing a lot of hard things. And I either made it through that hard thing and I learned something new, or I failed. Like failed ugly, like in public, like embarrassingly. Yeah. And I'm still alive. I'm still here. And I learned from that too. And I was able to leverage both the wins and the losses as opportunities to learn, and realization that I've already done a lot of hard things. So the next hard thing, all the stuff before it got me ready for that. So take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. This one's going to suck too, just like the rest, but I can do this too. Yeah.
That's awesome, Halty. You reminded me of something that I learned from a mentor of mine. Basically trying to make it feel better, because failing sucks, dude. It just does.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, "Hey, reframe it. It's not necessarily a failure, but it's a learning opportunity."
Mm-hmm.
And now, if you keep making the same mistake, then you're a knucklehead, right? But failures are okay. Like, accept them and grow from it, and it's a learning moment. So that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, and thanks for sharing that great story, Michael. That's
seriously
awesome. That's awesome. That's real too. So
yeah.
That's cool. So let's get into some of the content conversation based off the chapter of strengths, and taking an inventory is something that's where we start, right? There's different assessments you can do. There's Clifton strengths. There's all kinds of different assessments that one can do to kind of say, here you go, based off of your results from this questionnaire or whatever, here you go. But we found in our process of going back and looking and reflecting, kind of like my example of looking back and finding a state of flow. Michael, what are some of the ways that you've been able to reflect and acknowledge, what you're good at, what's naturally awesome about Michael? Like, what are some of the things that you've had to do to go back and discover that?
What I'll say there is, like, first off, like, I mean, yeah, there's tons of assessments out there. And, it could tell you, like, what Hogwarts school you belong to or whatever.
Yes. Where's my sorting hat?
On your strengths. Yeah, exactly. But there is some goodness in there. Like, I mean, and what I think is great about them is, like, their descriptions, not definitions.
Right.
So if you can get a description of how you're feeling, or, like,
great advice.
like what you're doing, that's cool. That's like a bonus. So I don't like to dismiss them all. I mean, even though I am a Gallup Strengths Finder coach, no plug there, no plug at all. But what I'll say is that, like, like this whole, like, tailoring strengths as you're going through transition, that I'll share, like, a quick story about where I had just gotten out, and I was putting my resume out there everywhere, and I was a logistics enlisted. I was logistics as an officer, so I was going to do logistics as a civilian, and just being the best fit. And I'd come to the final interview with the CEO. I was applying for the COO position of, basically like one of those companies that loads all the stuff on an airplane to, like, all your snacks, all your toiletries, like all that kind of stuff. They load them all in. So I was applying for the COO position, and we're getting down to, like, one of the final questions, and he's like, can you tell me about your management style? And this is, like, what not to do. But the intent was good. I said, well, I'm sort of, like, inherently lazy. I don't want to do anyone else's job. And what I should have said is that I practice a management style of emancipation. Like, I want you to be able to make your own decisions and not wait around for me, because I don't want to do your job. Yeah. So that was, like, a huge, like, I was just being very frank, talking about, like, I don't want to do anyone else's job. I'm sorry if I just dropped an F-bomb. But Yeah, like, I
Fine.
mean, you can't do anyone else's job. So I don't, yeah. That was a great life lesson on like how to tailor, like, because I'm really good at like emancipation in terms of my management style. Like, I want to build you up and let you run.
Mm.
And it's easy to like provide top cover, but the way I sold it was not good. So I think we'll get into a little bit more, like maybe later on, like we can talk about like sort of interview styles and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like it's not only important to know what you're good at, but how you articulate it really matters.
Mhm.
Exactly.
And knowing
I knew
the
what I was
audience.
really good at. Well, yeah, I didn't know the audience, like I was, I'm still like, like us just talking, like, well, like if you were all asking like what my management style is like, I would have said the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And it's not about
you gave
sales, right?
Yeah.
You're not selling yourself. You're just being honest and open about who you are, what you're
Exactly.
capable of, but using the right language for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah, you gave a great example, Michael, of looking back, reflecting, and yes, it's a little bit humorous now, and maybe not in the moment when it happened, but a learning moment, learning opportunity. But the words came out from that story, right? Just like Halty said, you're putting together the right language to truly communicate the value that you offer people. So that's a great example. It's a great encouragement, I think, for those that are listening, that your stories don't have to be perfect either, because in your stories, there's goodness, there's something there. And in this case, we're looking for strengths. We're looking for talents, the things that make you uniquely you. Now, let's just say you've built this inventory, and Michael, you've now discovered you love to empower people, you love to do all these things. It's the thing that we found, and all three of us have worked in the veteran space for years now, and we've seen this. It's hard to talk about yourself, and so the minute we say, "Hey, veteran so and so in transition," like, hey, as you start preparing for interviews and whatnot, you could see the uneasiness and just they're not looking forward to that, because they know they're gonna have to talk. And here's the thing: is you're the item, or the thing we're going to talk about. So what makes it so hard for us to talk about our strengths?
I would say like what makes it hard to talk about our strengths is we come from, an organization where it's all about the community. So it's like, it's a collective. How good are we?
Yeah.
And I'm just part of that. So then to break yourself out of that, and then to be able to talk about like what I'm really good at, it's not inherent in like what we've done like through our service. We don't brag upon ourselves. We brag upon like our unit or our command, whatever, wherever we're at. We brag upon that, not like what I did to do that. So it's a huge mind shift, to go through that. And what I would encourage folks to like, think about is, if you go through that and you want to talk about yourself, think about like, like the experiences that you had that like really stood out in your mind, where, wow, that was impactful because of someone like talking to me, or me talking to someone, and rely upon that. And because you were there, you changed the situation, and you should recognize that.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thinking about not only the situation, and the team was there, the team helped in many ways, or someone mentored you, but owning what you did, like owning what your piece of it. Do you think that there's a way to do that, or a way that you found that can do that is less salesy, less look at me, kind of all of that? Like, how do you come across authentic?
How do you come across authentic? Being vulnerable and being humble.
Wow.
And that's something that we don't really learn a lot about, in the military.
Right.
Vulnerability is a weakness. Vulnerability, is also a strength, when we apply it to ourselves and how we connect with people. And I would say, looking at strengths, I'm very connected and I'm very individualistic. And I used those skills, I didn't have a label because I hadn't taken my sorting cap, assessment to determine what those are labeled as. But I was very connected to people. I was very connected to our mission. I was also very individualistic. And I would say fast forward until just this past year, being able to do that, creating a psychologically safe place, which I didn't know, we didn't have a label for it back then of what it was called. But just by listening, by being curious, by not telling people what to do, but to guide people to the right path. I'm currently mentoring a 24-year-old woman at our organization as she's going through a transition in her career. So it's incredible. And she's civilian. It translates. I can't believe I'm still using the same skills I used when I was a very young junior officer. And fast forward to today, I'm still using those skills. Now I just have a label.
That's cool. So going back to your example of the interview, and maybe you didn't land with the right words in that example. Definitely you learned, right? You learned I have to tailor my what's relevant and what makes sense for this interview, right? You're about to go into an interview. What are some of the recommendations or things you do to prepare for say a conversation? And maybe it's not a high level interview where you're now talking to the CEO, but it could be just a cup of coffee, maybe. What are some of the recommendations on tailoring the conversation to talk about your strengths and talents?
Yeah, totally. First thing, drop the acronyms and the C stories.
Oof.
It just doesn't translate. It doesn't translate well.
Yeah.
And it often makes the recipient feel guilty, they didn't serve. And here you are with all these cool acronyms and secret signs, and it just doesn't work.
Right.
So the way I looked at it was what is the essence of what I did, in the military? And I'll just I can give an example. It was my first tour. I already been in 12 years, and it's my first tour as an officer, and I was a food service officer on a guided missile cruiser. Just a really thankless job.
Where's my strawberry, sir?
Exactly. Exactly. Nice reference, Halty. But I'll say that the way that it reads in my fit rep, right? I served a crew of, or I managed a food service operation for 350 people, 4 meals a day, averaging 200 meals per serving, and it's just very statistically, correct.
Right.
The way I would sell myself is that hey, so for a couple of years I managed the Waffle House, and I was I ran everything from just the morale of the kitchen to the morale of the staff to customer service experience, and just break it down more of oh, okay, I can get that. So it wasn't
Right.
like fine dining. You know, it was like more of like a diner. Yeah. It was just a submersible diner. But yeah, like I mean, we'd go down and we had a small staff. If anyone got sick, we couldn't call any replacements. So like talking and then make it fun, like make it
Right.
relatable, right? So
Yeah.
like, oh, now I get it. Okay. Same thing I would say about like on my other side, like being like a supply officer. Like I managed the Napa Auto Parts,
Hmm.
um, but we didn't have any resupply options. So like I mean, we really had to be very specific on like what we needed for the next 12 months.
Yeah.
Wow. What
Wow.
an amazing, I never thought about that way. A way to reframe inside the context of what the person who's sitting across from you can understand relatably, like you said, not using a bunch of acronyms. But yeah, it's like a Waffle House. You know what? You've been to Waffle House, and you tell a story, and then you can use those numbers, those statistics, and all of those things, and then they become much more relevant. And then at the, sometimes maybe some of the listeners have heard of the star format, right? The situation, what was the task, what was the action I took, and then what was the big finisher, right? What was the what at the end, and do you have any thoughts around, how do you go from a submersible Waffle House giving all your numbers and really beautifully kind of wrap it up at the end to give them the like, oh, okay, like I really get this.
Yeah. So then like to talk about like, okay, so I was working at this Napa Auto Parts. I was the manager of this Napa Auto Parts, and I had the best inventory percentage of all the Napa Auto Parts on the West Coast. Even further dive in. So like once you get them and they start understanding, then just drive it home. Like just keep narrating that story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good advice. There's so much good there. I loved how you started with don't assume that the audience knows what you're talking about when you start, with all the acronyms and stuff. I can't tell you how many times, even just within our own military, if I'm talking, 'cause I was in the Navy, right? So if I'm talking to an Army individual that served in the Army, they might start spouting MOS or numbers and nomenclature. And sometimes my mind's stuck on that, and they've moved on. The conversation's going, they're talking, but my mind is stuck on that first thing they said. I'm like, what is that? And I don't want to interrupt them, but it's a distraction for me, and that could be my problem. It probably is. But also, in pertaining to talking to civilians, I used to say when somebody would say, "Hey, what'd you do in the military?" Well, I was a cryptologist, and I'm like, "Wait, what?" That's kind of what I would get. And I remember working with a coach who heard me say it several times, and they're like, "How would you describe what you did to like a 6th grade elementary class?" I'm like, "Oh, I probably lose them." So I'm a code breaker. That I just break codes. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's simple. It's digestible. It's easy. Cool. Now get past, move on, keep telling the story, and get to the value of what you can bring." And it's those little things. I can't tell you how many times I've been through numerous iterations of my personal pitch, just like it sounds like all of us do this. And so the encouragement for those listening is this takes work. You're not going to just because you go through this course and just because you answer these questions or these prompts, out comes this amazing gold, right? It's going to be rough. So work on it, craft it, then reach out to those around you, your mentors, your tribe, some safe cups of coffee, practice, and then keep refining it. And I think that's something that we want to encourage you to do. And so one final question, Michael, so we can wrap up this topic here. Reflecting on some of the lessons learned in your personal transition, can you share any specific challenges that you faced, and how you overcame it? Like, what practical tips did you learn from it that you'd like to share, and maybe resources that you'd like to share with the audience?
My transition sucked. It, as many do. I retired like on September 30th, went to work on October 1st for a government contractor. Just because like that's what I was supposed to do, right? And yeah, it led me into a really dark hole. I mean, ideation started creeping in. I just felt no worth. And, you know, I didn't know what I needed for like a full life. I had never taken that time to think about what I needed for a full life.
Wow.
And so if I was to give anyone advice on, you know, I hate to give advice, but I love to give suggestions, is that, you know, don't do it alone. You know, especially like that, you know, well, I mean, even in like boot camp, you get paired up with like, you know, like a swim buddy, like a running partner, somebody that's just going to go through the suck with you, but that you can lean on. And, you know, one of the things, like, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Sebastian Younger, but like, you know, he talks about like the fact that like
tribe,
the tribe, like when we come back, like what's so different about like, you know, like you think about the veterans of World War II, like, I mean, they were getting deployed in like, you know, by like counties or, you know, like block radiuses. So like they'd come back, not as many, but they would come back, but they all had that shared experience and they were living in that same community. So they never lost community. Today, like, I mean, you know, we can go from being over in Bagram to Costco in Long Beach, you know, within 36 hours. And that's not cool. There's no transition there.
Right.
So to go back to Younger, like he has this quote, I'll paraphrase it, but it's just like, you know, today's veterans, you know, like they're willing to serve and they come home and although that they know what, like they were willing to die for the country, they don't know how to live for the country. And I think a program like this, I mean, really drives home like how to live.
Wow.
Now that you're out of uniform.
Yeah.
I almost got to pause on that for a moment to give it the space it's due. Because when you really contemplate that, it's one thing to say it out loud. It's another thing to lay it over onto your own life. I was willing to die for my country. How am I living for it today, right now? And I think that is really worth contemplating and finding the hope that is there, because there's a ton of work that needs to be done in America. And that we've already done, as we started out the conversation, is doing so many hard things. It got us ready for this next hard thing. So we can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Good encouragement there. And man, thanks for joining us, Michael. You definitely gave us a lot to think about. I know you gave myself a lot to think about when we finished this call. And I know a lot of things that were said resonated with the audience. So thank you for being a part of this experience. And if folks want to get a hold of you, Michael, how could people do that?
Yeah, just search for me on LinkedIn. I'm the one with the unique Waopele middle name. So it's easy to find me. WAO. Just look for that. Like, but I'm on LinkedIn.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks again. And just like Michael said, don't do it alone. I think that's key. You heard an example here of somebody who's definitely being vulnerable and sharing how hard it was not having a course like this, which it's just a course on its own, but it's more when you connect and you actually follow the steps, which is to connect, to reach out to people, to build a tribe, to do cups of coffee. That is really what we're trying to do here. So we believe you are going to get a job, but we really want you to get a job that matters and realize that there's more than just jobs that's occurring. Your life is going to be changing at the same time. And so there's a lot to figure out, and we just don't want you to do it alone. And we want to invite our guests Those that are tuning in to head over to vectoraccelerator.org, where you can download our transition checklist and or enroll in Vector Accelerator's self-guided virtual course. And this course is designed to help you accelerate your journey to clarity, conviction, and confidence.